A stronger wave is already behind it. That's the claim. Now here's NOAA's own forecast, published within hours of the storm this title describes, in the agency's own official language. No G1 or greater geomagnetic storms are expected on 04, 05 Aug, not stronger, weaker. The two specific coronal mass ejections already tracked, already confirmed, already following directly behind the storm that just struck Earth, are forecast to produce a KP index of only 2 to 3, well below the threshold for a storm at all. Here's what actually did hit Earth, and it's real, and it's worth understanding precisely. At 17:59 UTC on August 2nd, 2026, Earth's magnetic field crossed into G2. Moderate, storm territory. A genuine, measured, instrumentally confirmed geomagnetic storm, its source traced directly back to a solar flare that erupted from the sun 3 days earlier. Here's the part almost none of the coverage repeating stronger wave seems to have actually checked. No G3 watch was ever issued for this event. No cannibal CME was ever confirmed. And the specific, real G3 storm some of this framing might actually be thinking of doesn't arrive until August 18th, 16 days later from a completely different, unrelated set of sunspots. So is there really a stronger wave behind this one? Or is the honest story that this specific storm, genuinely real, genuinely worth explaining precisely, arrived, peaked, and is already fading, with nothing larger confirmed to follow it for more than 2 weeks? Stay with me. If Erdnatomy is where you come when a space weather headline needs its forecast actually checked, hit like subscribe and drop a comment right now. Tell me where you're watching from and whether you caught any aurora the night of August 2nd. And ask yourself this: when a storm this routine gets described with language reserved for something far more severe, where do you think that specific exaggeration actually comes from? Drop your guess in the comments. Now, let's get into it. Part O new. The title audit. What NOAA actually forecast. This documentary opens the way this channel always opens when a headline makes a specific, checkable claim, by checking it directly against the primary source. The claim? A moderate storm just hit Earth, and a stronger wave is already behind it. The first half is accurate, and this documentary will spend considerable time explaining it precisely. The second half does not survive contact with NOAA's own published forecast. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center issued its official 3-day forecast at 0:30 UTC on August 3rd, 2026. Hours after the storm this title describes had already peaked. Its own stated rationale, quoted directly, G1 minor geomagnetic storms are expected on 03 Aug as the CME ongoing effects persist. No G1 or greater geomagnetic storms are expected on 04, 05 Aug, as no further transient or recurrent solar wind significant features are forecast. 2 coronal mass ejections launched from the sun on July 31st, a full day before the storm that actually struck Earth, are already being tracked. This documentary's underlying research confirms both are explicitly described as slow, and both are forecast to produce a peak KP index of only 2 to 3 upon arrival, expected sometime between 8 o'clock and 14 o'clock UTC on August 4th. A KP of 2 to 3 sits well below the threshold of 5 required to register as even the mildest storm category on NOAA's own scale. This documentary's underlying research states this finding directly, describing it as the single most important corrective in this entire dossier. No G3 watch was formally issued by NOAA for this event or its immediate follow-on activity. No credible source or NOAA product applied the specific term cannibal CME to this sequence. The confirmed, measured outcome was G2. Nothing larger has been confirmed to follow it. Not within the time frame this documentary is examining. This documentary will establish directly in its later sections a genuinely real, forecast G3 storm connected to entirely different sunspots, arriving more than 2 weeks after this specific event. This documentary is not going to let that separate, later story be conflated with the one this title describes as already behind it. #part TWO. What actually happened? The storm itself. Before this documentary turns to correcting what didn't happen, it owes you the full, precise account of what genuinely did. At approximately 12:29 UTC on August 2nd, 2026, a coronal mass ejection physically struck Earth's magnetosphere. An arrival the independent monitoring site spaceweather.com confirmed directly in its own real-time reporting. As predicted, a CME hit Earth on August 2nd around 12:29 UTC. The impact sparked a G2 class geomagnetic storm. Approximately 5.5 hours later, at 17:59 UTC, Earth's geomagnetic field crossed the specific threshold defining a G2 moderate category storm. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center confirmed this directly in an official news release published at 18:42 UTC that same day under the headline Moderate G2 Geomagnetic Storming Observed, 02 August 2026. The release's complete text. The geomagnetic field reached G2 moderate storm levels at 02 1759 UTC, following the arrival of a CME. Additional G2 storm periods are expected through 02 2359 UTC, with G1 minor storming expected to continue into the early hours UTC of 03 Aug. This documentary's underlying research confirms this specific timeline in full. G2 conditions persisted from 1759 UTC through at least 2359 UTC on August 2nd, with somewhat milder G1 conditions continuing into the early morning hours of August 3rd. The following day's official forecast, issued at 0:30 UTC on August 3rd, provided the retrospective, confirmed peak measurement directly. The greatest observed 3-hour KP over the past 24 hours was 6 NOAA scale G2. This is a genuinely real, genuinely measured, instrumentally confirmed geomagnetic storm. This documentary's next several sections will trace it back to its precise origin on the Sun, and then explain, in full physical detail, exactly what a storm at this specific severity level does and does not do to the planet it strikes. #part 3HRE. Tracing it back, the flare that started it. Every geomagnetic storm has a specific point of origin on the Sun's surface, and this documentary's underlying research traces this one back with genuine precision. The source, a long-duration, M1.9 class solar flare, erupting from a sunspot region designated Active Region 4492, peaking at approximately 17 o'clock UTC on July 30th, 2026, 3 days before the resulting storm actually struck Earth. At the moment of eruption, AR4492 sat at solar coordinates N15W82, 15 degrees north of the Sun's equator, and 82 degrees west of the disk's central meridian, meaning the region was already positioned close to the Sun's western edge, as observed from Earth. Multiple independent instruments confirmed the associated coronal mass ejections departure from the Sun in near-simultaneous detail. The Stereo spacecraft's CAR-2 coronagraph first captured the eruption at 1653 UTC. NOAA's own GEES satellite, carrying its CCOR2 instrument, captured independent confirmation at 1715 UTC that same evening. Radio astronomers tracking the eruption's shockwave recorded 2 separate Type 2 radio sweeps, the specific signature associated with a CME's leading shock front. The first at 1627 UTC suggesting a velocity of 853 km per second, the second at 1645 UTC suggesting a considerably faster 1681 km per second. This is the precise, multi-instrument confirmed origin point of the storm this documentary's Part 2 already detailed in full. #Part 4. Not powerful. Patient. Here is the specific, genuinely interesting scientific nuance underlying why this particular flare, despite its comparatively modest raw classification, still managed to launch a CME significant enough to produce a confirmed G2 storm. M-class flares occupy the middle tier of the Sun's flare classification system, well below the most extreme X-class category. An M1.9 reading, specifically, sits toward the lower end of even that middle tier. By raw brightness and intensity alone, a genuinely unremarkable event. But this specific flare carried an unusual characteristic worth explaining directly: duration. EarthSky's own science reporting captured this precisely. The event wasn't that strong in terms of flare strength, but it was a slow, long-lasting blast. That gave it power enough to hurl a massive amount of plasma into space, far more than other faint CMEs we've seen recently. This is a genuinely important distinction this documentary wants you to hold on to. A solar flare's raw brightness classification and the mass of the coronal mass ejection it launches are related, but not identical, measurements. A flare that burns slowly and persistently over many hours, rather than peaking sharply and fading quickly, can continue feeding material into an associated eruption for a considerably longer window, producing a CME with genuinely substantial mass, even from a source flare that never crossed into the most dramatic classification tier. Atmospheric scientist and space weather communicator Vincent Ledvina offered a specific, accessible description of the underlying physics directly. On July 30th, sunspot region AR 4492 fired an M1.9 flare from near the sun's western edge and launched a CME. A CME is a giant cloud of solar plasma with a magnetic field wound up inside it, basically a sun sneeze, and that field is what does the storming. ## part 5. The filament that added mass. Beyond the flare itself, one further, closely related eruption occurred in near-simultaneous conjunction, and this documentary's underlying research identifies it as a specific, meaningful contributor to the resulting CME's overall physical mass. A solar filament, a long, thread-like structure of dense, relatively cool plasma suspended above the sun's surface by the surrounding magnetic field, erupted from a location close to the AR 4492 flare at coordinates N20W67, spanning roughly 8 degrees of the sun's surface. This documentary's underlying research confirms this filament eruption occurred simultaneously with, or in close, causally related proximity to, the AR 4492 flare itself. The specific physical consequence: this filament eruption contributed additional plasma directly into the combined eruptive event, reinforcing the overall mass of the CME that would go on to strike Earth 3 days later. Two closely coordinated eruptions, the flare itself and this nearby filament, combining their material into a single, more substantial outgoing structure, rather than the CME representing the product of the flare alone. ## part SX. AR 4492's magnetic profile, the simple kind. This documentary now examines the specific magnetic character of the sunspot region responsible for this entire sequence, because understanding it precisely helps explain why this event, despite being genuinely real, never carried the potential for anything more severe. At the specific moment of its eruption, AR 4492 carried a magnetic classification of HAX, alpha. A designation this documentary's underlying research explains in full technical detail. The HAX component describes an asymmetric bipolar sunspot group with only a rudimentary penumbra developed on its larger spot. The alpha component is the more significant classification for this documentary's purposes. It represents the simplest possible magnetic structure a sunspot group can carry. A single magnetic polarity with no significant opposing flux mixed into the same structure. This documentary's broader reporting on prior solar events has already established the full magnetic classification hierarchy. This specific designation sits at the bottom of alpha, the simplest, beta, a step more complex, beta gamma, more complex still, and beta gamma delta, the most volatile, dangerous configuration a sunspot group can carry, associated with the highest probability of the most extreme X-class eruptions. AR 4492 at alpha sat at the simplest, least inherently dangerous end of that entire scale. EarthSky's own archived reporting from roughly 5 days before the eruption captured this directly. AR 4492 alpha. This region remains the second largest, However, it showed stable behavior and produced no flares. The M1.9 flare this region eventually produced represents, by this documentary's assessment, toward the upper end of what an alpha-classified region typically generates. Its genuine impact traceable specifically to its position and its unusual duration. This documentary's Part 4 already established, rather than to any extreme underlying magnetic complexity. Part 7. Flares and CMEs, the physics in full. Before this documentary explains precisely how a CME produces a geomagnetic storm, it establishes the underlying distinction between the two related phenomena this entire story depends on. A solar flare is a burst of electromagnetic radiation, light, X-rays, extreme ultraviolet, traveling at the literal speed of light, reaching Earth in approximately 8 minutes regardless of the flare's overall size. This radiation can immediately disrupt radio communications across Earth's sunlit hemisphere, the specific mechanism underlying NOAA's separate R-scale for radio blackout events. A coronal mass ejection is a fundamentally different, physically distinct phenomenon. NASA's own Goddard Space Flight Center describes it directly: a giant cloud of solar plasma with a magnetic field wound up inside it. This is genuine, physical matter. Billions of tons of magnetized plasma, launched from the Sun's outer atmosphere at velocities ranging from roughly 250 kilometers per second on the slow end to more than 3,000 kilometers per second for the most extreme eruptions ever recorded. Because a CME is physical mass rather than light, it takes considerably longer to cross the roughly 150 million kilometers separating the Sun from Earth. Typically 1 to 4 days, depending on the specific eruption's velocity. The AR4492 flare's own radiation reached Earth within minutes on July 30th, contributing to a minor radiation storm this documentary's later sections will detail briefly. The associated CME, launched from that same eruption, took approximately 3 full days to complete its own, considerably slower journey, arriving at 12:29 UTC on August 2nd. Precisely the timeline this documentary's Part 2 already established. Part EIG8. Why a CME actually causes a storm. This documentary now explains the specific physical mechanism connecting a CME's arrival to the measured geomagnetic disturbance this documentary has already confirmed occurred. When a CME reaches Earth, its own internal, embedded magnetic field interacts directly with the invisible magnetic shield surrounding our planet, the magnetosphere. If the CME's magnetic field happens to be oriented southward, what space physicists call a negative B's, it can connect directly with Earth's own, northward-oriented magnetic field lines through a process called magnetic reconnection. This connection allows a substantial flow of energy and charged particles to pour directly into Earth's inner magnetosphere, feeding a structure called the ring current, a donut-shaped belt of energized particles encircling the planet, whose own magnetic field then measurably distorts Earth's broader magnetic field, producing precisely the kind of geomagnetic storm this documentary has been tracking throughout. This documentary's underlying research confirms this specific mechanism genuinely occurred during the August 2nd to 3 event. An aurora tracking account reported the solar wind's BZ component reaching deeply negative values, specifically -14 to -15 nanotesla. Conditions strongly conducive to exactly the reconnection process this section has just described, and directly consistent with the confirmed aurora activity this documentary's next section will detail in full. Part 9. Reading the G-scale. What moderate precisely means. This documentary now turns to NOAA's own official classification system for geomagnetic storms, because understanding this scale precisely is essential to correctly calibrating this entire event's genuine severity. NOAA's space weather scale runs from G1, minor, through G5, extreme, 5 distinct tiers, based directly on the KP index, a standardized global measurement of geomagnetic disturbance, derived from a network of magnetometer stations positioned around the world and calculated in 3-hour blocks on a scale running from 0, completely quiet, to 9, the most intense reading the scale allows. At G1, KP5, weak power grid fluctuations, minor satellite effects, aurora visible at high latitudes specifically. At G2, KP6. This documentary's confirmed event. NOAA's own scale describes high latitude power voltage alarms, possible transformer damage only under prolonged conditions, spacecraft orientation corrections potentially needed, HF radio fading at high latitudes, and aurora visible as far south as New York or Idaho. At G3, KP7, power grid corrective actions potentially needed, GPS degradation, satellite surface charging. At G4, KP8, widespread power control problems, extensive satellite navigation disruption. And at G5, KP9, the maximum. Genuine grid collapse risk, complete HF radio blackout, satellite positioning errors lasting hours. NOAA's own documented frequency data provides essential context for understanding exactly how routine this documentary's confirmed G2 event actually was. Approximately 600 G2 level storm days occur across a full 11-year solar cycle, roughly 55 per year during a cycle's more active periods. G5 events, by direct contrast, occur only about 4 times per full solar cycle. This documentary's confirmed event, G2, KP6, sits precisely on the second rung of a 5-rung ladder, with 3 considerably more severe categories still above it. Part 10. The confirmed peak, precisely. Having established the full G-scale, this documentary now returns to the specific, confirmed measurement this event actually produced. NOAA's official 3-day forecast, issued at 0:30 UTC on August 3rd, states the confirmed retrospective finding directly. The greatest observed 3-hour KP value across the preceding 24 hours was 6, corresponding precisely to G2, moderate, on the 5-tier scale this documentary's previous section detailed in full. Spaceweather.com's own independent, real-time instrumentation recorded a comparable, corroborating measurement during the event itself. 24-hour maximum KP of 5.67 at the specific moment of their own snapshot. A reading fully consistent with the official, retrospectively confirmed KP6 peak, captured within the standard 3-hour synoptic measurement window NOAA's own methodology uses. This is the complete, confirmed measurement underlying this entire documentary's central story. A real, instrumentally verified G2 storm, its onset and duration precisely time-stamped, its peak severity precisely measured, sitting exactly where NOAA's own established scale places it. Genuinely notable, genuinely worth this documentary's full, careful explanation, and genuinely, verifiably, not the more severe event some circulating coverage has implied it either was or was about to become. Part E11. What people actually saw in the sky. This documentary now turns to the single genuinely spectacular, publicly visible consequence of this confirmed G2 storm, the aurora. Social media monitoring during the evening of August 2nd directly confirms aurora activity was actively occurring. A specific astronomy-focused account posted in real time. Breaking. CHE Norton LITSAA still happening! Tonight, August 2nd, 2026, the northern lights are still dancing across the sky, offering another incredible chance to witness them. A separate, dedicated aurora tracking account documented the specific magnetic conditions enabling this visible display directly, reporting the BZ reading this documentary's Part 8 already explained reaching -14 to -15 nanotesla, and noting a specific, evolving pattern. Aurora storm skillfully avoided Europe, but now US and Canada have a chance, as BZ is negative again! NOAA's own pre-event forecast, reported through Forbes in the days immediately preceding the storm, projected potential aurora visibility under G2 conditions specifically across a substantial swath of the northern United States. Northern Oregon, Wyoming, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire. EarthSky's own reporting offered a comparably optimistic geographic projection. Aurora potentially visible from Edinburgh and Seattle to Toronto, Chicago, and possibly as far south as London and New York. This documentary preserves one specific, honest limitation directly. While aurora activity is genuinely confirmed to have occurred, no systematic, geolocated database of confirmed sighting locations had been compiled or published by NOAA or any comparable authoritative body within this documentary's specific research window. Social media evidence confirms displays were genuinely witnessed. Precise, city-by-city confirmed sighting data remains, as of this documentary's compilation, only partially documented. ## Part 12b. Why the Moon Got in the Way. This documentary now addresses a specific, practical factor that genuinely limited how many people actually managed to see this confirmed aurora display, even in locations where the geomagnetic conditions were technically favourable. Forbes' own space weather reporting flagged a specific, direct complication, the same general week as this storm featured a full moon. Colloquially, the buck moon, occurring around July 30th. A full moon's brightness genuinely washes out fainter aurora displays, reducing the naked eye visibility of exactly the kind of moderate, G2 level activity this documentary has been tracking throughout. A second, related seasonal factor compounds this specific limitation. Many August aurora displays at northern latitudes occur close enough to the summer solstice that nights remain genuinely short, further reducing the practical viewing window available to anyone hoping to witness the display directly. This documentary preserves one final, specific technical note directly relevant to anyone who did attempt to observe this event. Modern camera sensors, particularly those using long exposure or dedicated night mode settings, can detect aurora activity well before the unaided human eye is capable of perceiving its color, meaning a genuinely real, confirmed aurora display can be entirely photographable, while remaining subtle or effectively invisible to someone simply looking up without that specific technological assistance. ## Part 13. What technology actually experienced the confirmed absence of impact? This documentary now turns to the specific, practical question underlying most public concern about any geomagnetic storm. What did this event actually do to the technology and infrastructure it passed over? NOAA's own pre-event forecast discussion identified a specific set of potential impacts associated with G2 level conditions. Possible voltage alarms at high latitude power systems, with prolonged storms carrying some potential to affect transformers. Possible orientation corrections needed for satellite operators, alongside modestly increased atmospheric drag on low Earth orbit spacecraft, and possible high-frequency radio fading, concentrated specifically at higher latitudes. This documentary states directly and precisely what actually occurred. As of this documentary's compilation, no confirmed, specific technological disruption attributable to this G2 storm has been documented in any primary agency communication. NOAA's own 3-day forecast, issued the following morning, stated this absence explicitly. No radio blackouts were observed over the past 24 hours. The same forecast confirmed solar radiation activity remained below the threshold required to register on NOAA's separate S-scale entirely. This documentary's underlying research is direct about what this absence of impact actually represents. It is entirely consistent with the normal, expected impact profile of a G2 level storm specifically. Precisely the routine, generally well-managed severity tier this documentary's Part 9 already established sits second from the bottom of NOAA's full 5-tier scale. ## Part 14. The stronger wave claim, fully dismantled. This documentary now returns directly to its title's central, specific claim, applying the full weight of everything this documentary has established so far. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center, in its official 3-day forecast issued at 0:30 UTC on August 3rd, identifies exactly 2 additional, follow-on features being actively tracked in this sequence's immediate aftermath. The first, the residual, lingering effects of the original July 30th CME itself, expected to produce continuing G1 level conditions as Earth continues passing through the outer, magnetized tail of that same structure. The specific mechanism underlying NOAA's own forecast for a brief, additional G1 window between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock UTC on August 3rd, corresponding to a modest KP reading of 4.67. The second, two genuinely separate, slower CMEs launched from the Sun on July 31st, a full day after the primary eruption this documentary has centered its story on. These two follow-on structures are forecast to arrive at Earth between approximately 8 o'clock and 14 o'clock UTC on August 4th, producing a projected KP index of only 2 to 3. This documentary's own comprehensive KP forecast table, drawn directly from NOAA's official product, confirms the complete trajectory. The greatest expected KP value for August 4th sits at 3.33, meaningfully below the threshold of 5 required to register as a storm at all. The greatest expected value for August 5th, 1.67, lower still. There is no confirmed stronger wave behind this storm. There are two confirmed weaker ones. ## part 15. Was this a cannibal CME? No. And here's the real one. This documentary now examines a specific technical term that has genuinely circulated in connection with events like this one, and applies the same precise, sourced correction this channel's entire mission is built around. A cannibal CME, formally termed complex ejector by researchers, occurs when a faster-moving coronal mass ejection launched from the same general region of the Sun physically catches up to and overtakes an earlier, slower CME while both are still traveling through interplanetary space, merging the two structures into a single, larger, considerably more complex magnetic formation before that combined structure reaches Earth. This documentary's underlying research confirms this specific mechanism can genuinely produce meaningfully enhanced geomagnetic activity when it does occur. This documentary states directly, NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center did not flag this specific event, the July 30th CME and its immediate aftermath, as a cannibal CME, and the available data does not support that characterization. The July 30th eruption was the dominant, fastest structure within this specific sequence. The two July 31st CMEs this documentary's previous section already detailed are explicitly described as slow, and are forecast to arrive after the primary structure has already passed, rather than merging with it in transit. A genuinely separate cannibal CME event did occur earlier in 2026, connected to a different active region, designated AR4479, around early June. An entirely distinct event, unrelated to the specific August 2nd to 3 sequence this documentary has been tracking throughout. This documentary preserves this distinction directly, because conflating these two separate events. One, a genuine cannibal CME from an earlier month, the other, this documentary's confirmed non-cannibal August storm, is precisely the kind of specific, checkable error this channel's entire approach exists to catch. ## part S16. Was a G3 watch ever issued? What slight chance actually means? This documentary now addresses directly whether any formal, official warning of a more severe storm was ever issued in connection with this specific event, because this is precisely the kind of question a title implying escalating severity should prompt. No G3, Strong Level Geomagnetic Storm Watch was formally issued by NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center for the August 2nd event, or its immediate follow-on activity, at any point in this documentary's underlying research. Pre-event forecaster commentary did, at points, mention a slight chance of G3 conditions, contingent specifically on whether the incoming CME's BZ component turned strongly southward upon its arrival. Precisely the kind of standard, honest, probabilistic language forecasters routinely use to describe a genuine but low probability tail scenario. This documentary states directly that specific phrasing is not equivalent to a formal G3 watch, which is a distinct, separately issued product NOAA did not release for this event. This documentary's underlying research also identifies a specific, traceable source of exaggeration worth noting directly. An unofficial, third-party community group post circulated language stating a G3 phase was likely during the first half of August 2nd, a characterization considerably stronger than anything NOAA's own official products actually stated. This documentary's next section on misinformation patterns will return to this specific example in fuller detail. The confirmed, actual outcome, this documentary has now established repeatedly throughout: G2, peak KP of 6, never upgraded, never approaching the G3 threshold at any point this documentary's research was able to verify, ## part 17, putting G2 in true proportion, the Carrington comparison, to fully calibrate exactly how severe and how routine this documentary's confirmed G2 event actually was. This documentary turns to the single benchmark every geomagnetic storm is ultimately measured against. The Carrington event of September 1859 remains the most extreme geomagnetic storm in the modern historical record, triggered by a solar flare directly observed by British astronomer Richard Carrington, the first such observation ever recorded, associated with what modern analysis understands to have been an extraordinarily fast, extraordinarily energetic coronal mass ejection. Its documented effects included disabling substantial portions of the era's telegraph network across both the United States and Europe, inducing currents strong enough to start fires in telegraph offices and deliver physical shocks to operators, and producing aurora visible at genuinely equatorial latitudes, Cuba, Hawaii, and Colombia among them, across 4 consecutive nights. Modern estimates place the Carrington event's DS index, a related measure of geomagnetic disturbance intensity, distinct from but complementary to the KP index this documentary has used throughout, at approximately -800 to -1750 nanotesla. For direct comparison, a severe G4 storm typically produces a DSE reading around -200 to -350. Even a maximum G5 event typically approaches only -500. The Carrington event's own lower bound estimate, -800, already exceeds the modern G5 threshold, placing it, by this documentary's underlying research, in a genuinely off-scale category, separated from even the most extreme storms NOAA's formal scale defines by a further 2 to 3 times. This documentary's confirmed G2 event, with its measured KP peak of 6, sits separated from the Carrington event by approximately 2 to 3 full orders of magnitude in DS depression. A G2 storm is to the Carrington event what a gentle gust of wind is to a Category 5 hurricane. A comparison this documentary includes not to diminish this event's genuine reality, but to give it its accurate, precise scientific proportion, ## part ejections. Why space weather forecasting is genuinely probabilistic. This documentary now explains the specific, honest reason forecasters could not have stated this storm's exact severity with full certainty until the CME had already arrived. A limitation this documentary's broader reporting has established in prior coverage of separate solar events, and one directly relevant to understanding why this event's pre-arrival forecasts used the specific hedged language. They did. The single most important parameter determining a CME's actual geomagnetic severity. The specific orientation of its internal magnetic field, the BZ component this documentary's Part 8 already explained in detail, cannot be reliably measured until the CME itself physically passes a specific monitoring position called the L1 Lagrange point, approximately 1.5 million kilometers upstream of Earth. Depending on the incoming solar wind's specific speed, that measurement typically arrives somewhere between 15 and 60 minutes before the CME itself reaches Earth. Before that direct measurement becomes available, forecasters can estimate a CME's speed, its overall mass, and its approximate arrival time with genuinely reasonable accuracy, using models including NOAA's own WSA-Enlil system alongside direct coronagraph imagery. But whether that incoming structure will actually carry a strongly southward BZ, the specific factor determining whether the resulting storm registers as G1, G2, G3, or higher, remains genuinely uncertain until the moment of that direct, close-range measurement. This is the precise, physical reason NOAA's own pre-arrival forecasts for this event described a range of possible outcomes, including a slight chance of G3 rather than a single, confidently predicted value. The event's actual, confirmed outcome, G2, peak KP of 6, never reaching G3, fell squarely within that originally forecast range. This documentary states directly, post-arrival NOAA statements, including the confirmed G2 alert issued at 1842 UTC on August 2nd, carry considerably higher authority than any pre-arrival forecast, precisely because they are based on genuine, direct measurement rather than probabilistic modeling. Part 19. AR4492 rotators away. This documentary now turns to the specific, present status of the sunspot region responsible for this entire sequence, because its current position directly explains why this specific region's story, for the moment, has concluded. By the time its associated CME actually struck Earth on August 2nd, active region 4492 had already continued its natural rotation across the Sun's visible surface, moving further still from the position at N15W82, this documentary's Part 3, already established at the moment of its original eruption. EarthSky's own July 31st reporting captured this trajectory directly. Sunspot region AR4492 in the northwest sparked the M1.9 blast at 17 UTC yesterday, just before rotating off the Earth-viewed side of our star. This documentary's underlying research confirms that by the specific window surrounding the CME's actual August 2nd to 3 arrival, allowing for the roughly 2 to 3 day transit time this documentary's Part 7 already established as typical for CME propagation, AR4492 had almost certainly rotated entirely onto the Sun's far side, placing it in a position no longer capable of directly, geo-effectively, influencing Earth, regardless of whatever additional activity it might independently continue producing. This specific active region's contribution to this documentary's story, in other words, is now complete. A single, well-documented eruption from a sunspot group that has since rotated out of any position to produce a direct repeat. Part 2020. The actual future storm. A completely separate story. This documentary now turns directly to the specific, genuine event this title's implied claim of an imminent stronger wave may, in fact, ultimately be referring to, while stating with full precision exactly why conflating it with this documentary's confirmed August 2nd storm would be a genuine, specific error. This documentary's underlying research identifies a separate NOAA media advisory, forecasting G3, strong-level geomagnetic storm conditions for the window spanning August 18th and 19, 2026. A full 16 days after the confirmed G2 event, this documentary has spent its full runtime examining. This forecast connects specifically to an entirely different set of solar eruptions, originating from active regions genuinely distinct from AR4492. This documentary states this distinction as precisely as its underlying research allows. As of this documentary's own specific August 3rd compilation date, this later, larger event remains a forecast. Genuinely real, genuinely worth independent tracking in its own right, but not yet confirmed, and not, under any accurate reading of the available evidence, already behind the storm this documentary's title otherwise correctly describes as having already struck. Two separate stories. One confirmed, complete, and already fading as this documentary is being produced. One forecast, still more than 2 weeks away, connected to entirely different sunspots. This documentary treats them as exactly that, related only by their shared subject matter, not by any genuine, direct sequence connecting one to the other. Part 20. How this specific exaggeration actually spread. This documentary now examines, directly and specifically, the traceable pattern behind exactly how this event's coverage came to imply a severity and an escalating trajectory its own primary sources do not actually support. This documentary's underlying research identifies 4 distinct, specific patterns of exaggeration circulating in secondary coverage of this event, each one worth correcting individually and precisely. The first, the specific G3 conflation this documentary's Part 16 already detailed. An unofficial, third-party social media post characterizing a G3 phase as likely, when NOAA's own actual forecast language used the considerably more measured phrase slight chance, and the confirmed outcome never exceeded G2 at any point. The second, the cannibal CME mislabeling this documentary's Part 15 already corrected directly. A genuine, scientifically valid term, correctly applicable to the entirely separate June 2026 event connected to our 4479, but not to this specific August sequence in which the 2 follow-on CMEs remain distinct, slower, and non-merging structures. The third, a broader pattern of framing that implies catastrophic infrastructure risk. Grid collapse, satellite failure, GPS outages. As though these represented likely, expected outcomes of a G2 level storm specifically, when this documentary's Part 13 already established the confirmed, actual outcome for this event was 0 reported infrastructure disruption of any kind. The fourth, the specific conflation this documentary's Part 20 already addressed directly. Treating the genuinely separate, forecast August 18th to 19G3 event as though it represented a continuation or intensification of this confirmed August 2nd G2 storm, rather than the entirely distinct, later, unrelated event it actually is. This documentary considers all 4 of these specific, traceable patterns precisely the kind of drift this channel's entire mission exists to correct. Not by denying that space weather carries genuine, real risk, but by insisting that any given event's actual, confirmed severity be reported at the precision the underlying evidence actually supports. Part 20 Tortuo. The conspiracy frames that are not the story. Whenever a solar or geomagnetic event generates this much circulating exaggeration, a predictable set of alternative explanations tends to follow directly behind it. And this documentary applies the same evidentiary standard to these claims that it has applied to every scientific claim throughout this dossier. The most common claim holds that geomagnetic storms, or the specific severity attributed to them in circulating coverage, are being deliberately manipulated or exaggerated for some hidden institutional purpose. Rather than the more mundane, thoroughly documented explanation this documentary has traced in full detail across its previous section, the ordinary, predictable dynamics of social media amplification, informal community reporting, and the genuine difficulty of communicating a probabilistic forecast's honest uncertainty in a single, shareable headline. Apply the actual, physical scale this documentary has already established throughout. The specific CME responsible for this confirmed G2 storm carried billions of tons of magnetized solar plasma, launched from the sun's corona, and traveling across roughly 150 million kilometers of open space before reaching Earth. The energy and mass involved in even this comparatively modest G2 level event dwarfs, by enormous margins, any technology human civilization has ever constructed or could plausibly deploy covertly. There is no publicly known, or scientifically plausible, mechanism by which any human technology could artificially generate, redirect, or amplify a coronal mass ejection at this physical scale. And this documentary's Part 14 already established, using NOAA's own directly quoted forecast language, that no genuine escalation beyond this confirmed G2 peak has actually occurred. The actual, complete explanation for everything this documentary has described. A genuinely real but comparatively routine G2 storm, traced back to a specific, moderately classified but unusually long-duration flare, followed by 2 genuinely weaker CMEs rather than any confirmed stronger one, requires no hidden mechanism. It requires only the physics this documentary has already spent 21 sections carefully explaining. ## part 2020. What forecasters are watching right now? Behind every figure in this documentary, specific institutions continue actively monitoring the exact systems this dossier has described. At NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center, forecasters continue tracking the 2 confirmed weaker follow-on CMEs this documentary's Part 14 detailed in full, watching directly for whether their forecast arrival, sometime between 8 o'clock and 14 o'clock UTC on August 4th, produces the projected KP2-3 range NOAA's own official forecast currently anticipates, or diverges from that specific projection in either direction. At the same agency, a separate team continues monitoring the developing conditions connected to the genuinely distinct forecast August 18th to 19G3 event this documentary's Part 20 detailed directly, tracking the specific, different active regions responsible for that later, larger, and entirely unrelated storm. And across the broader space weather monitoring community, spaceweather.com, EarthSky, and the independent aurora tracking accounts this documentary has quoted directly throughout. Observers continue watching for any further aurora activity, any renewed BZ southward turning, and any additional confirmation of exactly how completely this specific, confirmed G2 event has now faded. None of these institutions are claiming this specific story has produced any confirmed larger event since its own August 2nd peak. All of them are actively working in real time to track precisely what comes next, including, directly and specifically, the genuinely separate story still more than 2 weeks away. ## part 2024. The honest uncertainty section. This channel's foundational discipline is refusing to manufacture certainty the evidence does not support. Here, gathered directly from this documentary's underlying research, is everything about this specific event that remains genuinely, explicitly open. A complete, systematic, geolocated catalogue of confirmed aurora sighting locations for the August 2nd event has not yet been published by NOAA or any comparably authoritative body as of this documentary's compilation. Social media evidence confirms genuine activity occurred, but precise, city-level confirmation remains only partially documented. A detailed, retrospective technological impact assessment, covering any minor grid voltage alarms, satellite drag corrections, or high-frequency radio fade events that may have occurred during the confirmed G2 window, had not yet been compiled in any industry or agency incident log accessible to this documentary's underlying research. The genuinely separate, forecast August 18th to 19G3 event remains, as this documentary's Part 20 already established directly an unconfirmed forecast as of this documentary's specific compilation date. Real, worth independent tracking, but not yet an observed, confirmed event. And any continued solar activity from active region 4492, now positioned on the Sun's far side, remains outside the reach of Earth-facing monitoring instruments specifically, though it continues to be tracked by the STERO spacecraft's independent vantage point, meaning any renewed eruption from this same region will not directly affect Earth again until it completes its own rotation back toward the Earth-facing hemisphere, a process this documentary's underlying research estimates at approximately 2 weeks. This documentary will not manufacture false confidence on any of these 4 open questions. ## part 225. The wave that already passed. Return to where this documentary began. A moderate storm did hit Earth. That much this documentary has established with full, precise confirmation. A genuine G2 geomagnetic storm, peaking at KP6, its onset and duration time-stamped to the minute, its origin traced back through 3 days of careful, multi-instrument confirmation to a single, unusually patient flare from a magnetically simple sunspot that has since rotated entirely out of view. A stronger wave was not confirmed behind it. NOAA's own forecast, issued within hours of the storm's peak, stated the opposite outcome directly. 2 weaker structures following behind, projected to fall well short of even the mildest storm threshold, arriving 2 full days after the event this documentary has centered its story on. There is a genuinely stronger storm forecast. G3, a full category above this documentary's confirmed event. It is real. It deserves its own, separate, equally careful examination when it actually arrives. It is not this storm. It is not already behind it. It sits 16 days further down the calendar, connected to an entirely different patch of the sun's surface. The instruments at NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center are still recording, right now, as you finish this documentary. The 2 confirmed, weaker CMEs are still en route, their actual August 4th arrival still ahead of this documentary's own compilation date. And somewhere on the far side of the sun, entirely out of Earth's direct view, active region 4492 continues whatever it continues doing. Its next possible chapter, if there is one, still 2 weeks from rotating back into view. The wave that actually hit Earth has already passed. The instruments are still listening for whatever comes next.